Okay, let's have a look at planning and control. So, what do we mean by planning and control? So to be successful, an organization must create and sustain a competitive advantage. So by a competitive advantage, we mean we have to do something better than everybody else. And this always makes me think of Netflix versus Blockbuster. So we now have a Netflix and no Blockbuster. So how did Netflix win? What was their competitive advantage? Well, one thing I would say would be the convenience of Netflix. So it's a streaming service. So we don't need to leave our house. When you think back, it does sound quite inconvenient to go to a Blockbuster. So we used to drive there on a Friday night after work, get the movie we wanted, go home and watch the movie, and then we had to get it back to Blockbusters the next day, which sounds like a real faff, especially compared to just turning our TV on and picking whatever we want to watch. That's probably the biggest challenge with Netflix now, is just deciding. There's so many things there, picking what we're going to watch. And also, I would say that they were able to offer better value for money as well. So you paid one price per month, and you got like an unlimited access to all their movies and TV shows. Whereas Blockbuster is about £3 a movie. So if you say Netflix was £9, then I can get 3 movies at Blockbusters that I have to go and pick up and drop off, or I can have an unlimited amount of watch time. So that's why Blockbusters was ran literally into the ground by Netflix. Because generally there's 2 ways of getting a competitive advantage. You can be the cheapest, so we call them the cost leaders, or you can try and be the best, and we call them differentiated. And Netflix were cheaper and better, so they just outcompeted Blockbuster. And the sustainable thing is simply making sure it's hard to copy, which you could say, well, Netflix investing in all their IT and making sure they've got a very reliable service, so it doesn't really buffer very often. That makes it hard to copy, and therefore they have a sustainable competitive advantage. The performance of the organization will be improved by performance management. So, if we're thinking about Netflix, they want people to be watching, and so they're going to have to be measuring watching. They measure watch time per user, so they've got an average amount of time that every user spends watching Netflix every day, and they can see that if that starts to drop, well, what happens if you stop using it? Eventually you're going to cancel your subscription. If it starts to go up, then you're less likely to cancel, so you can sort of judge how well they're doing. And it's achieved through strategic planning and control. So they have a strategy, which is, at the moment, you could say, to create original content. So they're trying to launch like movies and TV shows that are unique to Netflix, because Blockbuster's gone now, so they're not competing against Blockbuster there, but they've got new competitors like Disney and Paramount and Apple and Prime, loads of different streaming services now. So they're having to tweak their strategy, and then they're having to measure it, see if it's working. So if I'm Netflix, I'd obviously love to know, what percentage of that watch time is spent on new content. And what percentage is spent on sort of old content, to see if this new content's working. Because it's like my wife loves the US Office on Netflix, and she'll watch that over and over and over again. She doesn't really watch any of the new stuff. So if they ever got rid of the US Office, they'd probably lose my wife as a Netflix subscriber. And so we need to know if people are actually watching this stuff that we're spending so much money producing. So strategic planning consists of setting objectives and then setting strategies to meet them. So I have an objective. It's just Christmas has just passed, and so I might be carrying a bit of Christmas weight, and I want to lose that weight. So how am I going to do that? What's my strategy, my plan for doing that? So I could, I guess I could cut back on my calories, eat a little bit less, or I could do some exercise to try and burn a few more calories. So there's different ways of achieving our objectives. Our objectives should be SMART. So SMART is a good way of thinking about our objectives. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And I would say that's a handy mnemonic to have, because you can imagine an exam question putting forward an objective for a company and then saying, can you evaluate the objective? Plans to meet the strategic objectives, so they would come under the SAF criteria. So is it suitable, acceptable, and feasible? So not every plan is suitable, not every plan is acceptable, not every plan is feasible. So suitable, you need to take advantage of your strengths and weaknesses. Acceptable to your stakeholders, and then feasible as in can you actually do it? So I might go, well, I'd love to join a CrossFit gym, however it's not really suitable because there are no CrossFit gyms in my area, so I'd have to drive quite far. Would that be acceptable? Well, I've got a wife and 3 children, and so I might have to be at the house for 2 or 3 hours at a time to do that, and I don't think they'd be happy with that. Is it feasible? Well, I've never done CrossFit before, so I don't actually know what's involved, and I might end up injuring myself, so I don't know if I could actually do it. So probably not a good strategy. And then we would take those strategic, like the overall strategies, the corporate strategies we'd call them, and convert them into operational strategies. Control, so ensuring the organization achieves the objectives. So part of control is monitoring the achievement and taking corrective action where required. So for me, the word control and performance management, you can kind of use those interchangeably. So I'm trying to control the performance, or I'm trying to manage the performance. So I have to monitor, measure, I have to compare to the plan, how we're doing against our plan, and then if we're not going to achieve our plan, I have to take some kind of action. So aligned, it works well when control is aligned with the strategic objective. So there's no point in taking actions that don't align with our strategy. So a basic example would be if I'm a cost leader, so I'm trying to be the cheapest, well, there's no point in necessarily investing loads of money in customer service, because people don't necessarily expect a high standard of customer service when you're a cost leader. You know, if you think about Lidl versus say Waitrose, you know, if I have a complaint at Lidl, I kind of expect that I'll probably have to wait in the queue and talk to the person behind the till, and they might have to call a manager, and it's going to be a bit of a pain for me. Whereas if I go to Waitrose and I'm spending a bit more money, I might expect them to have a separate customer service section where I can go and lodge my complaint, so it's not as inconvenient. So your controls, your actions, your measures, your standards and your actions should all be aligned towards the strategy. Right, so let's have a look at the levels of planning control within an organization then. So they exist at the strategic level, the tactical level, and the operational level. So strategic level plans are going to be long-term, and they're going to be thinking about the external environment. So particularly thinking about the opportunities that are out there. So you can see they've got new markets or potentially new products. Tactical tends to be more medium term. So when we say medium term, we're thinking maybe 1 to 2 years, and not quite as long term and not quite as wide in scope. And then operational, we're thinking sort of day to day, right? So I would imagine if we take a supermarket, so you have the board of directors, and the board of directors supermarket, we're going to take a big one, you know, like a Tesco's or something like that. So they're going to have they're going to be thinking about what new markets they can enter, maybe what countries they could expand Tesco's into, or potentially what new divisions they can launch. So they have like Tesco Mobile, they've got Tesco Bank, they've got Tesco Insurance. So they're quite well diversified. So those would be the decisions that the board of directors would be considering. The tactical level, so here we're talking about an area manager. So an area manager would be responsible for all of the supermarkets in their area. I live in the northwest of England, and there'll be quite a few Tesco's around in the northwest of England. There'll be an area manager for the northwest of England. There'll be one for the Midlands and one for Wales and Scotland and that sort of thing. So they would be sort of thinking about, okay, what's going to happen over the next 1 to 2 years. They're probably thinking about what new stores could we open, or what new products could we get on the shelves, or how much should we be, what kind of offers can we do in my area. So they will make some, you could argue, they're strategic decisions. It sort of depends on the size of the organization. I always think what decisions will happen at each level. So those would be the decisions an area manager would make, and their control is going to be the budget. That would be a big one for them. Operational, so you're talking like a store manager here, so just looking after one store of Tesco's, and they would be thinking about, well, who's going to be working this week? Do I have a rota for my staff? And what prices do I need to put against each item on the shelf? And how much inventory do I have? So you can see they're very short term, day to day, week to week, month would be the longest time we're thinking, high levels of detail, sort of thing. So I think this is quite a handy way of thinking about the different decisions that are made in the organization depending on the levels. Most of the course we're going to be acting at the strategic level, so we're going to be thinking about long-term, wide in scope kind of decisions, but it's something to bear in mind, the tactical and operational level as well. Right, let's talk about some of these performance measures then. So performance measure should be linked to the overall objective. So there's no point in measuring something that doesn't link to what you want to achieve. Consistent with each other at all levels of the organization. Right, so an objective that Volkswagen has at the moment is they want to make sure that they only sell electric vehicles by 2035. So that's an overall corporate objective for Volkswagen. And Volkswagen, if you Google them, they actually own quite a few different car brands. So they own Volkswagen, that one's probably obvious, but then they also own Skoda and Audi and Bentley and Ducati and MAN. They own quite a few different vehicle manufacturers. So if Volkswagen as a group have said they want to sell electric vehicles by 2035, then that means that Audi is going to have to only sell electric vehicles by 2035, and Skoda would be the same. So that's what we mean by it has to be consistent at all levels of the organization, from the top to the bottom. Underneath the divisions, there may be design departments. So Audi might have their own design department. And so we'd have to say to them, well, look, you need to design either new models that are electric, or you have to tweak the existing designs to make them electric. And so we're going to give you an objective. We'll decide which one we want, and then we're going to give you an objective to do that. So the objectives flow down the organization, right? Those are decisions. That's what we've decided we're going to do. But then the sort of achieving the objectives should flow up. So as the design department achieves their objective, that will then allow Audi to achieve its objective of selling electric vehicles, which would mean that overall the Volkswagen Group are achieving their objective. Performance measures then. So measure effectiveness of processes or products, for example, making sure we're using our resources effectively. Long and short term, we want to have a bit of a mixture. If we have too many short-term measures, then management could be focused on hitting those to the detriment of the longer term of the organization. Adaptable to changing circumstances, so we don't want to be too rigid with our performance measures. If a change comes up, we want to be able to tweak that system. Internal and external focus, so we want to make sure we've got a bit of a mixture. Financial and non-financial measures should motivate the staff to do what we want them to do, and then mindful that there'd be a trade-off between measures. So you can say like profit is probably the traditional performance measure of an organization. So if you make more profit than last year, you're performing better than you did last year. So does profit measure effectiveness? Yes, good. So you'd think that if we make more profit, we're being more effective because theoretically we'd have more sales. Does it measure the efficient use of resources? Yeah, because you've got to control your costs to make profit. Is it a nice one of long and short term? I mean, no, I'd say profit tends to be more of a short term focus. So you can maximize profit this year to the detriment of next year. An easy way of doing that would be like increasing our prices. to customers and then beating up our suppliers or even switching suppliers to get cheaper products, which affects your quality. Adaptable to changing circumstances. I guess you could say that the profit target might change. When COVID hit, I'm sure that everyone sort of slashed their profit targets and thought, well, it's not going to be a good year in 2020. But then we've got internal and external. Well, profit tends to be internal, so we're lacking that external. Financial and non-financial, so it's only financial. So non-financial stuff is really handy because it can give you an idea of what's going to happen next year. So sales, for example, would be a financial target. Customer satisfaction would be a non-financial. So just because I've made lots of sales this year doesn't mean those customers are coming back. However, if I have very satisfied customers, then they're probably going to come back. So non-financial can actually tell you a little bit more about the future. Motivate my staff. Well, I don't know about you, but profit never really worked for motivating me because it was so far removed from what I was doing, and it never really felt like mine anyway. So you're making money for somebody else. So I'm not great from that point of view. And then mindful, there might be a trade-off between the measures. So if we just focus on profit, then there is going to be a trade-off, isn't there? Because people will focus on maximizing profit and not necessarily thinking about future revenue and that sort of thing. So strategic versus operational management. So on the strategic side of things, we've got that wide focus, high level, so very summary. We don't tend to look into too much detail. Operational, more routine, more local, more kind of detailed decisions. Heavier focus on planning on the future. Operational, heavier focus on control, so hitting the plan. So the board directors might come up with the budget for the next 5 years, and operational would then execute that budget. Long-term focus versus short-term. Strategic, you're focused on the future. Operational, we're focused on the past. So when you do like a variance analysis, that tends to be backwards looking, comparing what we spent to what we should have spent. Mostly external. Operational, mainly internal. Strategic would be non-routine issues, so new acquisitions or developing a new product or entering a new market, sort of things you don't tend to do every day. They would be like once in a blue moon sort of things. Whereas operational, you'd expect it to be fairly repetitive, routine things that you're looking at. Strategic, occasional feedback. Operational, you tend to be able to see more regular feedback. I mean, if you think about your strategic plan, it's kind of hard to see if it's working on a day-to-day basis, whereas you might get some feedback maybe after a few years whether it's working or not. So there can be a conflict between strategic objectives and shorter-term decisions. So more common in large organizations where you've got loads of managers, so lots of people with opinions. You've got a high level of delegated responsibility, so you're allowing those managers to implement the decisions they're making. Performance-based rewards, so i.e. a bonus, and particularly if we haven't aligned the bonus correctly with our overall objectives. I always think a good phrase to keep in mind is what gets measured gets done, and what gets measured and paid definitely gets done. So what could cause this conflict? So poor communication, they don't know exactly what the targets are, disagreement on how we're going to get to the objectives. Managers are rewarded based on their achievement of short-term targets, so we give them profit targets or sales targets, and they go out and they try and make as much profit as possible, or they sell as hard as they can, which might mean they sell things to customers they don't actually want. So in the long run, we're trying to make profitability, trying to be profitable. Our short-term target would be something like keeping costs within budget. Short-term decisions, so we can use cheaper materials, reduce the training of staff, delay machine repairs. You can see how all of these things are good, maybe good profit-wise for the short term, but not in the long run. So long-term impacts, well, cheaper materials means less quality, reduced training means poorly trained staff, so poor customer service experience. Machines would break down if we're not maintaining them regularly. So long-term profitability not achieved, right? So there has to be that consistency of objectives, I would say, up and down. We talked about that. So the top of Volkswagen objective has to be consistent with the bottom of Volkswagen, and what this is driving at is that they have to also be consistent in time scales as well. So if there's something you want to achieve in 5 years, then you have to sort of set some shorter term targets for your staff that are going to allow you to hit those longer term targets as well.